Welcome. I am joined very luckily by two amazing people and one me today. Before we get started, just kind of go around the room and say who we are, but I'll keep it really short because I'm really excited to hear what you guys have to say. But my name's Dan Gerstein. I'm with Pistol Shrimp. We are working on the sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters, which we have announced the name of as Free Stars, Children of Infinity. And I worked on several other games in the past, all with Toys for Bob when I was in game development. So Skylanders, and then many licensed games that you've probably not heard of. Or if you have, tell me about it. I'd be really interested. And that's it for me. How about you?
I'll let Garry go.
Sure, I'm Garry. I'm co-founder and co-CEO of Massive Damage. We made Halcyon 6, which is a bit of a tribute to the Ur-Quan Masters, but we can get into that later.
More than a bit, I would say. Yeah.
Peter?
I'm Peter, and I'm the what is my title? I'm creative director / head of production at Massive Damage. It's always very liquid, fluid. And yeah, on Halcyon 6, like Garry just mentioned, I was the writer, lead writer, and I guess lead game designer, along with Garry, who did a ton of game design as well. We were sort of like co-captains of that game.
Cool. Well, unfortunately I prepared the wrong way for this conversation because I spent the last week playing Star Renegades, and I was like, I should have played Halcyon 6. What was I doing?
The humor of Star Renegades, it was a different writer. That was Aaron Winslow who wrote the bulk of that. I did some writing, but the sense of humor, like you can definitely see the roots of it. Halcyon 6, I would say even more so, but Star Renegades definitely as well.
Cool. Well, yeah, we can. I will gush about it later, I promise. But you said that Halcyon 6 was like a tribute. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but yeah, like, how did you learn about the Ur-Quan Masters? Like, did you play it when you were young? And what was your experience of the Ur-Quan Masters?
Oh man, I honestly, okay, so I played a little bit of games when I was like quite young. My dad had like an Amiga. And played a whole bunch of games. But it was, I remember my cousin, my aunt and uncle and cousin lived in Guelph, and I would often go. He was like my older cousin, and he had a floppy disk version of it. I forget how many floppy disks it was, like it must have been 8 or something like that, maybe 12. I don't know, it was some large number. And at first it was just he was older cousin, like always beating us at everything kind of thing, and would play Super Melee with us. And I was like, this game is awesome. Like I always lost, but like this game is great. And then, end of the weekend kind of thing. And he was like, oh yeah, and there's like this whole story element. I was like, what? This is a whole story element. I mean, I was fairly young at the time. But he kind of showed me a little bit around it, and I was just like, wow, this looks great. But I'm still mostly interested in Super Melee kind of thing because of how dynamic and like fun it was. And the multiplayer sort of aspect. And then like years later, I remember there was like a CD-ROM re-release of it, and I convinced my parents to buy it. And it was really only then that I started playing like the campaign. And that to me was just like, oh my God, this is like, it had probably been a few years old by then, but like this was like the experience. Like this is like, there's nothing, I'd never played anything like it. And I became obsessed with it. I'm sure I was still fairly young. I'm sure I think I had the strategy guide or something, because like it's kind of a tough slog if you don't have help kind of thing. But I kind of memorized it. I memorized all like the quasi space like locations and everything. Just like, and I played it. I honestly think I played it like once a year for the next like 6 years or something, like from beginning to end. Like would just be like, okay, it's February, I'm gonna play the Ur-Quan Masters from beginning to end, and would just it was just like I was just completely obsessed with the game. And it definitely huge formative experience on me in terms of like sense of humor, and in terms of like obviously games. I mean, at the time, and I say this all the time, like I never thought I was going to end up in games ever. If anyone had told me back then, it was like, oh yeah, Peter, you're going to be a game designer, video game designer. I've been like, really? Like I'm going to drop everything else, then we can just focus on that. But I had no idea. And so the idea, and so anyway, it just like stuck with me. And then when Ken first pitched the idea of making like an indie game that, you know, we had a really awesome pixel artist, and it was talking about space, and it was just like, oh, we're gonna have this space station. And I think it was literally just like, but we want to have it so it's like explorable, and there's like these big empty spaces and you have to kind of like explore it. And I was like, oh, okay, so it must have been like built by some kind of, you know, precursor alien race. And it was just like, oh, so it's like, yeah, it's like the Ur-Quan Masters. Okay, but it's the space station. And then like, okay, what can we do with this? Okay, well, it can like build spaceships, and we've got these different officers, and you can assign it to it, and it has a whole like, you know, obviously all these other things, but yeah, heavily influenced by Ur-Quan Masters. And also like I would say like like games from that period, like, you know, the original XCOM and like Master of Orion, I think would be the big ones, but I'd say the Ur-Quan Masters is probably the biggest influence. Anyway, I'm just totally monopolizing the conversation. I remember also talking to Garry at one point. This was like early on, just a few months after like hiring me, and it was just like, hey, what's your favorite game of all time? And Garry was just like, oh yeah, it's the Ur-Quan Masters. This is my favorite game of all time. And I was like, that's my favorite game of all time. Like, like, how did this even happen? This is like crazy coincidence. Anyway, I'm gonna let Garry talk for like 20 minutes straight now.
Yeah, I mean, it is also my favorite game of all time, the Ur-Quan Masters. Like, I remember playing as a teenager and waking up on Saturday mornings and just booting it up and diving right into the campaign. I also played the Super Melee as well, but not as much as the campaign. And it was just I guess, a sense of wonder and the humor in it that really caught me off guard as a teenager. It was like, wow, games can be funny as well. Like that was just a whole different level. And all the alien races, I just loved exploring the universe and discovering a new alien race, and like, how do they talk? What's their quirks and their music? And I think we really,
the music is so good.
Yeah, and ever since, like Peter, I did play it regularly, replay it regularly over the years, and I tried to find that same magic in other games as I grew older, like Elite or, you know, Master Orion. And to be honest, nothing ever captured that same magical feel. And maybe it was because I was a teenager, I was impressionable, but really nothing ever captured that same feeling. And that's what we tried to do when we were making Halcyon 6, and we were thinking about the alien races that you interact with. We wanted to be much more than like a Master of Orion or a Civilization. When you encounter those races and it's all procedurally generated, and you have these kind of dialogue options that are pretty much the same across all races, right, in those games, versus Ur-Quan Masters, where every race had its own music, its own speech quirks, its own way of talking, and it was just amazing. So we tried to capture that as best we could.
Weird philosophy and like way of being in the universe.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, well, since we have more people, I feel less ashamed saying this, but you know, my dirty secret that I used to do development streams on Twitch, and I would just ramble about everything while I was working on the current game. And you know, my joke / dirty secret, it's not really a secret, is I thought the Ur-Quan Masters was just a space battle game. I didn't know there was more than Super Melee. I had like a similar experience to you, like Peter, where it was just like, I remember we had this thing where I grew up in Vado called the On-Ramp, where, you know, kids would just hang out, and actually Robert Leyland's, it was run by Robert Leyland's wife, Diane Asher. And I didn't know Robert at the time at all. And it's weird that years later I grew up working with him at Toys for Bob. But you would go there as a kid, and I just remember sitting there, and you know, I was of the age at 6, 7, whatever, where if you just sat me down in front of a computer and said I could push keys and they would make noises and sounds, I would be fascinated. I don't care, good games, bad games, I'd play them all. And I don't even remember which is which sometimes, but I remember playing Super Melee with my friend for hours. And at that point I had more of an appetite for competitive stuff. Now I've grown soft in my old age, but you know, I would go and play hours and hours of like spaceship combat. I'd be like, oh, this is so fun, this is so fun. And then I started actually working at Toys for Bob. And I remember Chris Nelson, who was part of like pioneering the open source port, would tell me, like, he would talk about it and say like, oh, it was such a great game. I'm like, yeah, it was really fun. He played it. And he would keep telling me like, well, what do you think of the story? And I said, what story? I didn't even realize there was a story. And so I never actually got to play the Ur-Quan Masters fully through. I think I picked up the campaign a couple times just to like look at it, but I was always often distracted. And, you know, I found that when I was working in games, I didn't play as many games, and I would kind of
Oh my
cycle up
God.
and down, which
Tell
is
me
just
about it,
weird
yeah.
because I'm thinking about games all the time. I need a break. Let me go paint something or whatever.
Mhm.
But eventually I actually played the Ur-Quan Masters in full only 3 years ago, something like that. So what's interesting and I find so fun about working on this project and like hearing your stories is like I had that story, but I had that experience, but in a very different way. And I missed what you said, Peter, I think is like, that's the core of the game. I mean, Melee is its own interesting like physics fighting game, but like, oh, that thing that everybody's been talking about, I wasn't even aware of it. And, one of our interesting learnings in like working with the community and what is it like to make a sequel for a game that's 30 years old, and like, well, how do you deliver expectations and steer expectations? There's a whole story there, but I don't have any nostalgia about the game. And coming into it and playing it just 3 years ago, I'd go, this is totally fresh. This is like, I struggle to think of games that really nailed this that I had played, either as a kid or as an adult. There's other games that I love that are different and I like for different reasons. But even with like my, that's I say cynical jokingly, with my cynical adult mind, after years in game development, after years of playing games, I picked up the Ur-Quan Masters, and I get that not everybody would have a taste for a very retro game with low resolution and whatever, but I don't care. I picked up, played, I go, wow, this is really memorable. And I still think about some of the things that happened and how striking they were to me, and the sequencing, and especially you bring up the alien races, what stood out to me, we have a metaphor in the team that's gotten a lot of traction just because of the season, which is, Gabe, we're working on things and it's like a Thanksgiving dinner where you need the turkey, which is the doctrinal conflict and the Ur-Quan and everything, but you also need the side dishes because it would be weird to show up to a Thanksgiving dinner where
there's just this
just
big
a turkey.
and the turkey's perfect, but there's nothing else.
There's nothing else.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If you showed up and there was like stuffing and cranberry sauce and whatever, sorry, this is a very American metaphor, but like, show up and there's no turkey, but just side dishes, it would be really confusing. However, if you ask people what they like about a Thanksgiving dinner, some people might say turkey, some people might say, I love the side dishes, but you need both. And so for me, like, I'm more of a side dish person. And when people talk about like the lore and story of the doctrinal conflict, I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but I still remember that one line Fwifo said about the Spathy prayer and how they say, oh God, please don't let me die today. Tomorrow would be so much better. And I'm just like, that has nothing to do with the story. That has nothing to do with the plot, but it has everything to do with that character or alien. They're kind of interchangeable, effectively.
Yeah.
Fwifo is kind of an edge case, but
Fwifo like the one actually, like Fwifo and the space station commander. Those are really, and I guess the
safe ones, like the Spathy High Council. Yeah.
I guess
there's a few.
I guess the Melnorm kind of might be the same person every time, but you're not sure. But there's so many interactions, like with the Thradash, it's like I don't know if am I talking to the same person or not, and it doesn't matter, which I actually kind of loved, and definitely like we kept with Halcyon 6. There were so many instances of like, wait, are you talking to the one person, or are you talking to like any number of this race? And it doesn't matter whatsoever. It's just people go with it. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is one of the things that were, we've been building this community, which is very new for me. I mean, having worked on like effectively a studio that got acquired by Activision, I've had a kind of bizarre career track of like corporate. Now I'm indie for the first time after everybody's been indie for a little while, and I'm learning a lot and we're learning a lot. And one of the aspects like we've learned is fun is education, and I don't need everybody to become a game designer, but that is something that people bring up as a complaint. And they even ask, they say, how come every time I meet an alien, it's always the same one? I would like to know Bob the Thradash, and I would like to know Betty the Thradash. And then, for me as a developer, I'm like, actually, I don't think you would. I think you would forget who the Thradash are when you start meeting individuals. So that conceit's actually
or like,
pretty
why
useful.
isn't this like Mass Effect, like where I'm like walking through all this area and spending a lot of time like traversing distances? Why does it go straight to conversation? It's like, well, if you actually were doing that, you might.
You might not enjoy it as much.
Not that I know. Maybe that's in the sequel. I don't know. I'm going down to live here. But like, but actually I think like the economy of time is something that the Ur-Quan Masters did really well compared to something like Mass Effect. It's like where it's just like, no, it's like it's like bam, 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 bam. There's no filler, it's just like you're going straight to the gameplay constantly, or to these incredible like conversations, or so it's just like the speed at which you're doing, even though it's this huge open world, it still felt like you were constantly doing interesting stuff, which is really a hard thing to redo. Like there's made like, honestly, like you can count it on, to use a, overused metaphor, but like count it on one hand. There's the Ur-Quan Masters, there's like Sid Meier's Pirates, and there's what else? I don't even know. I can't even think of anything else right now, but maybe I'm gonna get people yelling at me because there's all these examples. But like, I don't know. To me, it's like there really isn't that much like it.
Well, it's more, everybody's going to have a right answer for them. And, the cool part is there's no one right answer too when it comes to game. I mean, games are still art, right? So we get to have, this is our answer to this. This is my answer. For some people, I love that we have walking simulator as a genre that's been invented. Adventure used to be somewhat the most ridiculous, game genre. When you think about it too much, every genre name and every art form is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, it's pretty
role-playing game.
Yeah.
Simulation.
What? Yeah.
What? Yeah. But we have walkthroughs, so everybody can have their own answer. But I'm curious, like, because you brought up Halcyon 6, like when you were working on that, how did, like, when you're trying to follow something up and you're inspired by something, right? Or you have I don't want to put words in your mouth. For me, I'm literally working on a sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters, so I can say that. Like, I'm actually trying to follow up, and we're trying to follow up on the Ur-Quan Masters, and that's an answer for us. For Halcyon 6, how did that shape your vision and your day-to-day, or even your conversations? Like, was that part of it? Was it just sort of the seed in the beginning and then it took on its own life?
I would say it's almost like it came in, it pulsed in and out, it was like, I think the initial idea, I think the very first thing was just like, hey, let's come up with some concept art and ideas for races. And I was just like, okay, like, how do we make all these races interesting? With each one, I put a little bit of like a thing on it where it's just like, what's the reason that like talking to this member of this race would be kind of like representative of that one race? And so like there's like an AI, so it's like, well, the AI you talk to, and you're talking to the AI. Then there's like the Corzan were like psychic, so like they had this way of collectively communicating to each other through space. And so of course you're talking to like the main, the head speaker kind of. And so anyway, like put in a little bit of that, but then it was just like, okay, how do we make them different? Like, and like, the Ur-Quan Masters races, like, say, like, you said the Thradash. I've only ever heard of it as the Thradash, but I mean, that's just me. And
come up with your own pronunciation. Exactly. The original had no audio.
Yeah. And so we had we had like this super, sort of almost like, I wouldn't even know how to describe it exactly, but similar to, like, definitely based on that, where it's like they would consistently go through these periods of, they were highly genetically volatile, and so you would have these different like branches, like sub races, and then they would inadvertently like basically go on these like genocide sprees, and then you'd have like a dominant group, and they were awful. They were like the most awful like race you could possibly imagine. I was like, hey, this is different. And it was super dark, and I don't know if I would necessarily do that joke kind of these days, but anyway, like just trying to make them different, trying to make them visually different, but then it was like, then we kind of put development on hold for a bit as we were getting we were trying to like drum up interest in it. And then I kind of just forgot about it for a bit. It's like the game development. It's like some of the more basic stuff, the more nuts and bolts stuff ends up like, what does combat look like? It's just like, okay, I'm focusing on this for a while, trying to get this into like a game that has like a loop and is fun and scales. And then, and then it'd be like, okay, now's the time for us to go into art production on these ships. What do these ships look like? And then it'd be like, okay, go back to what it was. And then, again, it would be like, this is, go back to Ur-Quan Masters and like what worked with that, and how do we do something similar to that, and then you put it aside again for a while, and then eventually it's like, okay, now it's time for writing. Okay, like now we're back into that sort of creative inspiration. And so it's like you would go in and out of it. It wasn't like it was just like constant, it was more just like, it was always something that you could come back to creatively. Anyway, that was my experience. Garry might have a different response.
I think what it came down to was when we were kind of play testing through it and we interact with our races. It was always like, not that we used Ur-Quan Masters as like a template, but it's kind of set the standard. Like the feeling I got when I was talking to those races, we needed it to feel like that for Halcyon 6. And if it didn't feel that way, it was like, oh, I don't know. This is not engaging. I don't know what it is. We would just look at Ur-Quan Masters as kind of like, okay, what are they doing that's right? And what are we missing? And why? So we didn't try to copy it, but we try to catch that same feeling. It's like, okay, I want to talk to these races. That's the whole, like the impetus is like, I don't have to, but I really want to, because it's so much fun. Like I just want to talk to them. What are they going to say next? What are they going to ask me to do? All these crazy yablings as one of our races. Like, what are they going to do? Okay, and so I actively wanted the player to feel like they want to just go out across the galaxy just so that they can talk to them. And that's it. That's kind of the. So yeah, for us, Ur-Quan Masters was kind of like the tent pole and say, okay, we need to be as we need to capture that same feeling, not the mechanics, not all the systems, but the same feeling you get. Right.
The funny thing is, and this is maybe a little bit of a dirty secret, and maybe I'll get in trouble for saying it, but the writing in Halcyon 6 largely has zero impact on the game. There might be like 3 or 4 instances where it actually makes some kind of branching decision, but largely unaffects the game. And in a weird way, that was kind of freeing. It was just like, okay, well, largely that doesn't affect the game. So like, if you're gonna have dialogue, like make it memorable. Like have some like memorable jokes in there, have some kind of memorable interaction, because like it's free from like gameplay implications, so you can just make it memorable. If it's not memorable, then it doesn't really serve a purpose. So it was kind of freeing that way.
Yeah, I mean it's actually pretty true in the Ur-Quan Masters too. Every alien is just a lock and key to a large extent if you just dissolve everything. But the point is, like Garry was saying, is like there's a feeling you have when interacting, like, oh, I want to pick up that key, oh, I want to go see, and then alien like conversations become, I mean, this is straight out of Paul's mouth, they become more like dungeons. And how do you navigate the dungeon? How do you get through the maze so that you can reach the goal, but you're not sure what's around the next bend because you have to like take one step in the maze before you see what exits you have open to you. And so the conversations are, I mean, really, there's just a little flag like, yes, I got the rosy sphere or whatever, right? And the conversation is just a long and hopefully fun, but long winding path to just get you there. And it's like, yeah, what you do there, how you do it, there's a lot of room for interpretation. You bring up economy of time is an interesting one. And like Ur-Quan Masters is one of its sort of highlights for me is that you never do anything for that long. And so you can't, you could argue like planet side lander gameplay, maybe you have to do too much too often, depending on where you're in the game and how you're playing, but that's debatable. And what I found interesting is conversations are the one thing you spend a lot of time doing at once. And some conversations are short. You might visit, learn you can't do anything and go away. But usually, especially during the first encounter, like you brought up, Garry, like how it feels when you meet a new alien, and it's the initial encounter, there's something memorable about that. And it feels like it's a reward of itself in itself. Like, oh, I got to meet this character. And every character, like, well, I read a lot of science fiction, but a lot of science fiction I like is like, hey, it's still commentary on humanity, and it's still commentary on humanity, human race. And the alien is just, let's take some aspect of something we could imagine, not even humanity, but some aspect of what's in the world, and let's exaggerate that, and let's put it front and center. And then there's something to engage in. And here's our writing secret, quote unquote, which is, one thing, this is not really a pivot, but one thing I'll say is, like, as we've been talking to other writers and coaching other people, and like, here's how to write an Ur-Quan Masters game. That is one of our duties right now. One of the things we encourage people, and that's very hard if you haven't seen it before, you haven't thought about it before, we're learning, or I feel is challenging, is aliens have to be utterly convinced that what they're doing is incredibly true and incredibly serious. They take themselves 100% seriously, even if they're a gag. The Third Ash are a gag, right? The Spathi are a gag. They're supposed to be funny, but they don't know that. And they don't think they're funny. They're like, why would you do it any other way? And that's what makes it hilarious. And there's actually a writer that, Paul and Fred and I all love, which is Jack Vance. And if you read Jack Vance books, his ability to create very smart, very sharp characters that seem convinced of the most inane things is like one of the more memorable parts. And he's a prolific like pulp writer and just pumped out books when you were paid by the word and that sort of thing. And he can't write an ending. And there's all sorts of problems with his books. And it's from the 50s and it's aged certain ways in certain parts, but you know, if you put your goggles on, you can enjoy it. And I still enjoy a Jack Vance book once in a while. But I guess I was leading into a question, which is, what was it like if you had a clear vision of what it should be like you said, Garry, like, oh, we pull up the Ur-Quan Masters, that's sort of a reference. Like, what was it like, I guess, onboarding or encouraging other people to like move in that direction? Or did you have experiences where people were like, oh, there's a game in the story and I really want it to feel like, yes, I am the character walking around and it takes me a while? How would you, or how was it kind of encouraging people or coaching people, or did this just happen easily? You can tell me to like see that vision and align on that vision of how it could be. One sec, I have to fetch a bird, but I can hear you.
Sure. I mean, do you mean like the people in our company or players?
Sorry, there's a bird somewhere he shouldn't be. Yeah, I mean the folks who are working on it. I mean, were you able to build that alignment around it? I mean, someone played the Ur-Quan Masters, they might have their own opinion.
It was pretty easy because there was only 6 of us.
Yeah, so exactly. That's what I was gonna say. It's like, in terms of people adding content, it was really me and Garry. So we like didn't even really need to. It was just
wow.
Yeah.
I want that. That sounds great. how did you pull that? No, sorry, that's getting more into sort of how our project is, which is like, it's actually kind of a complicated game, but we have a handful of people working on it. But I guess maybe a better question would be, how did you even mention that you paused your work on it to go build more interest in the game? I'm just curious, how did Halcyon 6 come together, or even how did you start doing development? Peter, you said you didn't even know you were going to be a developer, so how did it all get started, speaking as a new indie?
Well, we had kind of a weird, I guess, weird history. Like we really came in, as a lot of companies did, like a lot of like, you know, indie success stories it came in the kind of like 2010, 2011, 2012 mobile boom. Like, you know, I think that in a large way there weren't really that many opportunities for new companies to form between like 2000, you know, like 7 and 2012 kind of thing. Like, it was very kind of difficult, but that was a big injection of possibilities. But you know, you work in mobile, it was sort of a you know, super exciting but kind of limited what you could do creatively. But that's kind of where we came from. I had been just writing plays. I was like a playwright. I actually have a theater background. It's a little embarrassing to
I just saw The Lion King on Friday, and I'm getting ready for a performance. I'm performing in a ballet, so don't worry. You can
yeah,
share
I feel like
everything.
I feel like a lot of theater people ended up in games. But again, if during, like, I would like neglect my theater studies to play, you know, Total War games and stuff, like, you know, like so I was a bad student. But yeah, so I'd been a playwright, and Garry and his brother Ken had started Massive Damage, and they were sort of looking for a writer, which in retrospect was like, really, why are you looking for a writer? But anyway, I was the one who ended up being that person, and then just slowly got my little tendrils in, and started doing more and more and more. And then when it came time to be like, actually, we're not going to make a mobile game, we're going to make like an indie PC game. Like, this is where our heart has always been, and there's an opportunity right now to do it. There's a lot of interest in indies, so like, we're gonna do it. And so it's like, okay, this is it. This is the big, you know, chance. So we did the whole, you know, we did the Kickstarter route, and in back when Kickstarter was, I mean, I guess Kickstarter is still very much a thing. It's just less in the news, I guess. And in 2015, we did the Kickstarter, and it went really well, and people were super generous, and people were like, yeah, this game looks like it's gonna be awesome, pixel art, you know, in space, like, you know, I can see all the influences, and you know, and we're, you know, I'm on this team's wavelength kind of thing. So people are super enthusiastic about it and super generous, and that's really what got it started. I mean, if that hadn't gone well, I don't know if we would have made it. Probably not. So it was a lot of luck, and then it kind of just landed in my lap. And Garry had taken a little bit of a break from the company, but came right back during the early days of the production, and was just like, yes, this looks awesome, let's do it. And so we just went all the way for it. And yeah, I don't know. Now I feel like I'm just like talking super general terms.
Yeah, I mean,
I,
to add to that, is it. I think yeah, it was just an evolution of our company, and then the first game we wanted to make free from free to play mechanisms. It was really a game, I guess, a culmination of a few of us that really found formative in their early lives, like the XCOM base building and the Ur-Quan Masters, alien interactions, and the kind of the 4X light 4X space opera. That was something that was resonated with a lot of the people in the company. The six of us, from the six of
yeah,
us.
yeah. I think like I remember reading this somewhere about musicians. It's just like musicians often are influenced by by other like bands that they listen to in their like between the ages of like 12 and 22. Like and then that's like that's set in stone, and then that is now your influence. And you look at like people like say like I don't know like Phoebe Bridgers or something like that. They're like super. They're from that emo era in like late 2000s. Like that's what they remember listening to, and now that's what they're doing. And it's like so these things come in waves. I think video games definitely similar thing. Like you mentioned, like when you're working in the industry, sometimes it's hard to find time to actually play a lot of games. So like what are your reference points? It's like stuff that you liked when you were a kid, stuff that like you always that are always going to stay with you. And you look at something like Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, like clearly the team that worked on that, like that's from their formative, experiences were from the late 90s, and I think that's pretty common for a lot of more indie like space developers. That's when you were in, that's when you got your inspiration.
Yeah, it influences is an interesting one. I mean, we could talk forever about influences and how those shape us, but it's really cool. I knew there was a Kickstarter success story. I didn't realize you were on a mobile games track and moving into PC games, and that's like, I mean, kudos to you. Not everybody can like make that jump successfully, and that's really cool. But as far as like influences, and especially being locked in time, pixel art even on its own it's like it's taken its own life. And like, yeah, I just played, well, I can be a little more topical, like I just played Star Renegades, and yeah, it's pixel art, but there's dynamic lighting and there's a lot of tricks going on that are not just handmade pixel art. And say, Ur-Quan Masters was, well, we didn't even call it pixel art, but then that was just art. There was no, yeah, so there wasn't, but pixel art's kind of taken on, I don't want to say a life of its own, but it's a style. It's sort of like doing black and white photography, right? Where like you can shoot color now. It's not hard. You can shoot digitally, but if you want to do black and white film photography, hey, go for it. So, when you're thinking about your influences, I early on, actually, Fred would sometimes say we're working on a retro game, and I had a complicated relationship with the word retro because it almost sounded like denigrating, and this is just me talking. I don't think it's a bad word, but a retro game, and I'm like, oh, no, it's just a game. It's modern. It's current. And, I played Star Renegades, and I go, well, I could see how this game could have come out 20 years ago. I think it would have been like, well, amazing if it came out 20 years ago, but
destroyed everyone's PC.
Yeah,
melted
exactly.
everything.
Like, I don't know how you're going to run it. Yeah. But conceptually, from a design standpoint, especially, people focus a lot about like art and, because that's the thing you see, art and sound, and how that is just the thing that advances like crazy. And now we have Unreal Engine 5 and whatever. And you could make photorealistic everything with ray tracing and words I don't even know because I don't know them yet. But then you have games going in a direction which is like, this is pixel art. But do you find, I'm just curious, like when you're drawing inspiration, like my story is pretty easy because I played Ur-Quan Masters, 3 years ago. And I said, this is fresh. This is just a game. It's a story. It's timeless. I'm doing something crazy right now, which is reading Moby Dick. And I'm reading it and I go, this is timeless too. And I like, you could argue whether you're bored or interested. I found myself sucked in by Moby Dick, and I'm like, oh, this is really fun. It's like poetry, but it's timeless. And so when you think about inspirations and like, well, I was inspired at a young age by this, but I've grown and I want to take it somewhere. How do you like, what's your relationship with, I'll just call it what I guess one way to call it, which is live in the past or go back to the past and nostalgia and, oh, I remember how I felt when I was 6 years old and all I had to do this, versus hey, I know what this was. I want to take it and take it somewhere else or move it into the present. Like, have you had experiences with that? Because, you know, yes, from an artistic standpoint, I can look and go, okay, well, there's a style, we have pixel art, but that's just a stylistic choice. As far as how the game feels, what's your relationship when you're creating with go back to the past versus take it and twist it, reshape it, whatever, take it into the present?
I think, yeah, it's a complicated relationship. I think you want to not, I guess, change too much, but at the same time, like, the world has changed. You've changed. Everybody's changed. The audience has changed. And I think for Star Renegades, we could have just went for a normal JRPG kind of way with it. And maybe I think early on when we are doing our first version of Star Renegades wasn't the 2D 3D hybrid. It was straight flat pixel art. Every character had about 10 frames of animation per second. And when we're playing it, we could have just went with that. But I think at the time we also knew that we needed to stand out and we needed to be different. And I think during that time there was a lot of indie pixel art games. And we thought, okay, how can we stand out? You can stand out with mechanics, you can stand out with graphics, and we try to do it with both. Like, we try to mine the past for these little nuggets that may have been overlooked. Like for Star Renegades, the combat system, the big thing we have is a time kind of mechanic where you can kind of break them into the next round. And that was in Child of Light and one other one. I can't remember the name. Remember, Peter, do you remember that other one? Was it a mana game? Might have been a mana game. Okay.
A lot of there's a handful of JRPGs that have at least invested in time action or active time battle sort of concepts and things, ways to delay.
Grandia is a big one.
Grandia 2, I think. Yeah. That's where if you countered somebody, just while they're attacking, at a certain point in their attack, you would interrupt them and cancel their attack or push them off. And so we try to take, like, basically mine these super memorable moments and things and mechanics in the past of our childhood and the games we've played, and merge them and mash them up in the interesting ways and say, okay, how can we take that feeling of, oh, I'm awesome because I was so smart in choosing this and timing it perfectly that I'm super rewarded and I remember that feeling. So capture that feeling and then try to recreate that feeling in our games. And that's kind of where we kind of took it.
So it's funny because, like, there are aspects of game development that, again, like, comes in waves. So, like, we, with Star Renegades, we're like, oh, we're pairing this and this with like an ultra, like a super modern, like, roguelite like structure. It's like, wait, roguelite's not modern. Like, roguelite is total retro, but at the same time, like, it became so in vogue in the last like 6 years, and there were so many, or I don't know, 10 years, I don't know, and there's so many great roguelike games, and obviously it was having a moment, and we're like, well, we want to make a game like this. We love games like this, like the idea of a game where you don't, where it's just like 80 hours of gameplay. It's like, I don't want that. Like, I have a 2-year-old. I don't want to play a game for 80 hours of story, but I would love to play a game where I can finish it in 10 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours and just do it again and again and again. And it's interesting each time. Like, I'd much rather play that. And it's like, even though, it's like, I don't have time to play these 80-hour story games, like, I still will play, a roguelike game for, it's like, oh, 200 hours. Oh, how did I do that? I must have left the piece on overnight a few times. But, like, just this idea of, there were aspects of Star Renegades, especially, that I think were like retro, but like we didn't think of them as retro. Like roguelite is retro, but it's also not. So because these things kind of come in waves, and it's almost more just like, how do you make an interesting product? And sometimes it's like draw on ideas from 20 years ago. Sometimes it's do ultra modern stuff that's only been invented recently or whatever. And it's really just about finding a combination of things. And in order to, like, fingers crossed, make something that feels different from other games.
Yeah. Did you, like, I mean, obviously the games speak for themselves, right? I mean, they have a Steam page. You can go look at it. You can see how the game plays. Especially when you were doing something like a Kickstarter for Halcyon 6, like, how did you invoke or leverage the past and people's ideas of games games from the past, like your own inspirations. How, there's a spectrum between this is inspired directly by this. Like, I'm just going to pull an example of somewhere. Monster Train, I don't know if you've played it, is just directly inspired by Slay the Spire. They make no qualms about it. They just straight up say, we loved Slay the Spire. Here's another
Great
game, which is our take. Yeah,
and Star Renegades definitely was inspired by Slay the Spire. Very different game, but
well, you can see, concepts. I mean, even like, Square Enix has moved on from turn-based RPGs, so not necessarily they're digging through their old catalog. Let's just say Final Fantasy maybe will never be turn-based ever again, right? The way we remember it growing up or whatever. And they have those things, but other games come in to fill in the niche. But when you're, especially like the product stands on its own, but when you're trying to get people hyped up for something or excited for something, how, like, did you find any tools, navigational situations where you were using the past to help you, or maybe more interestingly, was the past holding you back ever?
I mean, I think it was always just like, obviously, with pixel art, you're gonna want to, you don't want to, I would say you want a little bit of that sort of like comfort, sort of comfort foody kindness, to get back to your Thanksgiving metaphor. But it was always like, but it has to look different. It has to look like, both Halcyon 6 and Star Renegades, I would say there's no other game that quite looks like them. And it was always that was what we were going for. So it was always like pairing pixel art, but make it look different from any other game. And then just like, especially with the Kickstarters, like, it's all GIFs, man. It's GIFs all the way down. It's just like pixel art GIFs. People love pixel art GIFs. As many GIFs as you can get in that, you can shoehorn in that page. Got to do it. Because it's just like, people want to scroll down that page and just see a sumptuous feast of pixel art GIFs. I don't know. I don't have a great answer to that. Garry, do you have anything?
I think I guess it's somewhat related. If like from the myriad of GDC videos I've watched over the years, to like the kind of marketing and biz dev approach that I guess we've learned is, in order to like, you want to create that sense of familiarity. It's like, oh, it's like the Ur-Quan Masters, but, and then you add a twist. You add one or two things, right? You can't be too many. If you do 5 twists, then you've kind of gone way too far off of what you were inspired for. But if you do like, oh, it's a JRPG, but it's a roguelite, right? That's like, oh, okay, that's different. And you kind of, I like JRPGs, and roguelite will make a fresh take on it, maybe. Or, I like pixel art, but it's 3D now. Like it's not just pixel art. It's set in a 3D environment with lighting effects and modern effects. Like, ooh, okay, that looks interesting. I recognize it, but it's fresh now. It's something different, something unique on it. That's kind of, I think that also helps.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely I'm not teasing you, but that's the safe biz dev way to do it, is to say, here, we've given the business people words they like, and now we're going to go off and do what we need to do to make it its own game. But there is like something to be said,
You say that, I can't possibly.
No, well, I mean, innovation, if you innovate completely, then how does someone connect with it? You want
people need
a certain amount of, like, I think you said familiarity, familiarity and comfort, and nostalgia is such an interesting one because it cuts both ways. So, here, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I'm teasing you. You don't have to take any of this seriously, but I put you on the spot, which is, okay, it's been over 30 years since the Ur-Quan Masters. You learn there's a sequel coming out. What do you think that game is? I've told you nothing else other than it's a sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters. What's in that? What is that game to you? You had an experience at a young age. You even, you got to make a game where it was a reference point. I pulled very briefly, had almost no time to play Halcyon 6, but I pulled up and I was like, I saw precursors. I was like, hey, wait a minute. but like, seriously, that's an honest question. There's no wrong answer, but it's been 30 years. You just read an announcement. They're making a sequel. What pops into your head?
Oh, man. This is a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's
Let me think for a sec.
But
there's seriously no wrong answer, and we already have a community of 2,000 people who have given us their answer or whatever.
Excited, but mostly because it seems like it's the same people and team behind it. I think in this day and age, there's far too many, I'm gonna say it, biz dev and corporations trying to, I guess, capitalize on our nostalgia and this generation, right? We grew up with video games.
Oh
We
my
grew up with this
God.
kind of culture. And so we're now at an age where, we're the target market and they're trying to mine, I guess, the basically our nostalgia for
Yeah.
business opportunities, and it doesn't include the people that created it. And that's a travesty, right? It's just like, it's like, okay, well, you don't actually understand the magic that was. You're just trying to renew it for 2024 or whatever. So it gives me great assurance that it's the same people, it's the same creators, the same team. So I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it'll be great.
Okay, here I'm just gonna dive straight into the minefield here.
It's not intended to be a minefield. It's truly like I mean that it's an honest challenge we're working with, which is communicating with our audience about it.
No, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm putting us on the spot. No, I'm just saying it is. From a kind of like a narrative point of view, there's definitely some challenges, right? It's like, okay, obviously, the thing that made Ur-Quan Masters really work is that initial humanity lost the war, and you are the one group of people that can turn this around, and you have this tool. How do you start from that space again? And that's tough. Do you go to 300 years in the future and things are messed up again? Do you go to an alternate dimension? Do you go through is there some time travel, like Star Trek-y kind of time travel kind of twist? I don't know, but like getting back to that point where you are just a lone ship with your little crew and your little retinue of ships, and it's up to you to go around and save the dang universe. I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, you gotta start from sometimes a lot. This is if people at Massive Damage listen to this, they're gonna laugh maybe, but or scratch their eyes out in pain. But like oftentimes people are like, well, what do the designers want? What does Peter want? What's the thing that's the best decision? And then we'll just do that. It's like, well, no, it's like it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle to be solved, and you have to sometimes be like, okay, it's time travel. What's the implications of that? Like, or it's another universe. What's the implications of that? It's the Mass Effect Andromeda thing. You're going to another area. What's the where? And so if it was up to me, I'd be like, okay, let's scope out these starting points and figure out what's the best one to do. Like it's same universe, but there's another like that Star Wars thing, which I'm embarrassing myself for not knowing, but like where the other universe comes in and invades and it's a catastrophe. Like it's that, or I don't know. It's like you have to choose that starting point, because I think, and maybe I'm totally wrong on this, maybe this has already been like figured out, but it's like, how do you get to that point where you start as the sort of lone survivor and work your way from there? That's a really tough one. But that would be the starting point. I forget what the question is now. It really
the question is, what comes to mind? What do you think the game is? And I like that you went directly into problem solving. And actually, I would love to just speak directly to your remark, because I actually said the same thing.
Yeah,
because I think it is,
thing.
and it can be. This video isn't getting released for a while, so I feel comfortable sharing a little bit of our answer to that question. But otherwise, we've been a little bit like tight-lipped on spoilers for like what we're doing intentionally, because we want to share stuff about the game, but we also, it's a game, not a book. We want you to be able to experience the story as you play it, and that's that's a whole other question. But yeah, the question is, what do you think that game is, I guess, or what would you expect, or and I like that you went into the minefield. And I was like, oh, it's not that scary. It's more like, do you think it's a top-down space shooter? Would you expect No Man's Sky? Would you? I mean, it was a little more expectations. Although I loved both your answers.
Oh, I mean, yeah. In terms of gameplay, I mean, hey, I kind of just assumed it was going to be, the equivalent of, the same overall loop. But maybe I'm totally off on
There's
that.
no wrong answer. I mean, we've taken the answer of exactly what you said. I was just curious, like what you brought up alien races, both of you are like, oh, that's so memorable, and I can't wait to talk to them. I think Garry even said, like,
it's funny because
that's a core part.
For me, it's always just like, first question, what's the genre? What are the controls? What's the camera? What's like, because that's going to tell me what the genre is. That's always the first thing that comes to mind. And in this case, it was like, no, what's the story? Like, how do you, which is, I never start with. But yeah, in terms of like gameplay, I mean, I kind of just made the assumption it's going to be ship upgrading, it's going to be free exploration, and it's going to be some kind of Super Melee-esque combat. But maybe I'm totally off on that. Maybe you're going like homeworld route or something with like 3D big space battles. Maybe, I mean, maybe that would be quite ambitious, but maybe.
Whatever you do, for me, and it just kind of goes back to Halcyon 6's two main influences, which was Star Trek and Ur-Quan Masters. And both those, you really mostly speak to alien races through a screen on your ship bridge. And so for me, that's what it is. Ur-Quan Masters 2 or 3 you have to conduct your conversations with alien races through a screen. You should never actually see their full body. You should never see it in 3D. You should always just through that interface. And that to
corridor shooter. You don't think it should be corridor shooter?
No. Although we do, I mean, we did a couple experiments. One was what we called interiors, which were not necessarily, they could be used for shipboarding, but they were actually for going underneath the surface of planets or into buildings and planets. Because like, I don't know if you remember in Ur-Quan Masters, you might find the crash dreadnought. And so the crash dreadnought was there. You got a text display, you picked it up, end of story. One of the things that we cut, I'm actually sad about it, but maybe it'll come back later because we have this amazing character who you are going to use for interior exploration, which could be shipboarding. It could be going in the planets, or the crash dreadnought was, if you imagine the game starting at like hyperspace is the largest scale and planet side is the smallest scale, then one step lower would be interiors. And it was a slightly different experience. And it was fun to add a new kind of, I hesitate to call the gameplay segments of Ur-Quan Masters mini games, but they kind of are, they're like the lander mini game, the Super Melee mini game, and then you fuse them all together and they become the full game. But we had to cut that, unfortunately, just because it was out of scope. But we're really attached to it. If we could ever get back to it, we hope we can add it back in, which would be fun. But it's interesting you bring up, aliens on screens. That's an important one. We have that. I was legitimately curious just because when we're working with the audience, like one of our big goals as we've been doing this, especially when I was doing live development stream, is someone else actually used this phrase, and I'm going to borrow it now, which is development in the open. And that's one thing I think like the Larian team did really well. Like they were very clear about what Baldur's Gate 3 was. If you loved Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, it's pivoting a little. It's going to be a little more like this. If you love Divinity Original Sin, like 1 or 2, then maybe it's like much more familiar to you. You can look at Baldur's Gate 3, and I loved all of those games. Every game I just listed, I enjoyed all of them. And I love Baldur's Gate 3. I haven't finished it, but I love it so far. And I go, okay, well, I can see the like threads that connect all this. And there's a challenge for us is, well, somewhere in the spectrum of we want anyone to pick up this game and have a good time, whether or not they played the old game. That could be anything. It could be Slay the Spire. It could be a card game. I mean, you can go crazy with that and just throw away everything and use your universe and start using words, and then that's cool. But then you kind of lost the old game. And then there is, well, literally it has to look the same. And I'm not teasing the person, but there was someone who remarked on one of our Reddit posts that said, why don't you just use the old engine? And I was like,
that's amazing.
It is a good one. But it's also, to give the whoever said that on the internet some credit, it's like, that is a totally valid question. And so what we're learning is sort of like, hey, let's do what we're doing in the open so that whatever it is, people come along for the ride. One of the things that we get a lot, it's interesting you mentioned 4X, is a lot of people thought the Ur-Quan Masters should have or was actually a 4X game. And I go, no, it's not.
It kind of looks like one.
It has but if
yeah.
you pick up Master of Orion, then that's a 4X game.
That
has all of the like elements, and the way you replay it is very 4X-y. Ur-Quan Masters is like an adventure where I'm in charge. And so one thing that's been interesting, as sort of we've been learning, is I actually made a whole, sounds so project managery, which is true. I was a project manager for a little while, but I built like a word cloud, which is, okay, here are we call them pillars at Toys for Bob. These are the pillars like Skylanders. I can talk about the pillars of Skylanders. So for, Ur-Quan Masters 2, well, now we have a real title, but I'm still in the habit of the internal name, Ur-Quan Masters 2. So for Ur-Quan Masters 2, we have pillars of like, this is what makes it the Ur-Quan Masters. And so one thing, you could say a true sequel to the Ur-Quan Masters, and that's maybe what we'll tell our audience. But internally, we need something a little more specific, because what I just said could mean a lot of things. I mean, hopefully it's in space, right? But one phrase that I've latched onto that helps a lot, and I picked up Halcyon 6 just for a little bit, and I barely got started, but I already saw it evident in the way the text communicated with me, especially, is we call it be the captain. And so like the Star Trek fantasy, you know, one thing to like differentiate Mass Effect and a lot of actually sci-fi games is you're the grunt in the organization, right? And you have to do what the organization says. And there's an interstellar conflict or whatever, but you're just part of the bureaucracy. And, you know, you could even tease the like Star Wars prequels about that. Like, here we go with the Senate. All right. And then it gets kind of like muddied by that. But the Star Trek fantasy, especially, and Star Trek's huge influence on Ur-Quan Masters is, well, you're still the captain. Sure, you might be working for the Federation or whatever, you know, but at the end of the day, your mission is to go to uncharted areas, explore, and you're ultimately a like captain on a science mission, right? And it's sort of a like humanities science mission. And be the captain is one of those powerful ones because it can mean a lot of things, but it at least informs the sense of agency. And that's how, for us, it becomes not a 4X game, because a 4X game is like, I'm a strategist.
Yeah.
No, everything
Yeah.
happens because you're the captain on the bridge and you see it happen. And that's like kind of a spiritual part of the game we found.
Cool. I mean, going back to one of your older question about the merging the old and the new, I actually just now thought about the God of War remake, the 2010, and how that really just reinvented so much of God of War, but really helped, I guess, bring it into the new age. Like, I guess the players that had played the God of War through the years, they changed, right? They changed, they became dads and moms and whatever. And I guess it was smart for Santa Monica to realize, like, hey, we're not just going to make the same God of War game where you're just a violent misogynist destroying and murdering everybody, because that's what our audience is not. They've grown up, they've matured, they've got kids. And so they kind of really, I don't know if it's intentional, but marketed. I know Corey really brought his own personal experiences of it. He was a dad, he wanted to bring that, and that really showed through. And man, when I'm actually just replaying it now, and I'm really like identifying it as a father as well, and as an older man who, you know, can't just jump around everywhere anymore. You feel that deliberateness in the game, and it's just like really smart. And so something that we probably will have to take into effect, that like our audience has changed too, right? If we try to tap into the nostalgia of the Ur-Quan Masters 30 years ago and make it identical to what it was, it probably won't resonate with that audience anymore, like the older people that brought up, because we've changed. Like, I don't, like, I want to start as a captain because I've been a leader and a captain for so long now, and in my life I've kind of moved up the ladder. I wouldn't want to start as a janitor anymore. I just don't identify with it.
I mean, actually, God of War, that's a great comparator. And one of the things, Corey has talked about it. And one of the things that I thought was really elegant about it is they actually have a whole in-universe fiction, you know, for what happened to Kratos. And he was irredeemable and horrible, right? And so they actually turned the game into that. And I loved the God of War remake too. I thought that was really well handled. And just what you said about nostalgia is so tricky because, you know, I'll butcher the quote, so I won't even try, but, you know, no man never steps in the same river twice, because it's not the same man and it's not the same river. And it's like, when we talk about nostalgia, you know, it's such a complicated thing. And like, I almost want to avoid it so much. Of course, the business development side of my brain says, oh no, we should tap into nostalgia, but it's so hard because you can't recreate the past. I can't be 6 years old without a care in the world, sitting around playing games all day, wishing I could go home from school and think about that. I'm thinking about bills. I'm thinking about, you know, taking care of, I don't have children, but I have pets. You know, I'm thinking about all these other responsibilities and what that's like. And it, just what you said resonates with me, at least, which is, well, how would I take my personal experience and, you know, impart that on someone? And I can, you know, Paul's not right here, but I can speak a little bit for him and how some of the characters in Ur-Quan Masters 2 actually are directly related to his own life experience. And they're written as like, this was something I actually had to deal with. And, you know, of course, I think as artists, we all like to be influenced by what was going on. The challenging part is, of course, we want to communicate with our audience. And the thing with the audience is, the reason I asked that question too, is they've had 30 years to think about what a sequel to this game is. I mean, we have a really, I'll call them like our core contingent, people who are in our Discord, who still play the Ur-Quan Masters, or are still even modding the Ur-Quan Masters. They're still looking for online melee matches. You know, that's a very niche person, but it's right up front to them. for some people, I imagine maybe you haven't played it in a while. Maybe you actually haven't played it since 10 years ago or 30 years ago. Who knows? How you remember it being might not be how it actually was. And that's such an interesting thing to handle too, because I'm sure, like, yes, I have fond memories of the original God of War. I might pick it up now and go, I can't stomach this. It's too violent. I'm not
Too
that
violent,
violent. I don't like that anymore. You know, I can't handle blood and stuff in games anymore. It's just not to my taste, you know. More power to anybody who does. But carrying people along for the ride is something I've appreciated with, the God of War reboot did a good job. Baldur's Gate 3, I think the way they communicated, they had a long development cycle and they did early access. And I like how they communicated, hey, here's what the game is, rather than figure out, oh gosh, we need to sell people on what we're doing. They just, here's the game, this is what we're doing. Some people might say, wait a minute, that you lost the thing that I loved. But for people who were excited, you could at least take them along for the ride, and maybe they'd get fired up, like, oh, they're still doing this thing I loved, even if one person's pet feature maybe didn't make the cut or something from an old product. So it's tricky.
The reason I left is because, not to denigrate the person who suggests to use the old engine, is just more the idea of anyone, like the idea of reusing an engine from even like 2.5 years ago to me is like, oh god, never do that. Can't imagine like 30 years ago, or there was the updated open source version from like 15 years ago. Am I like off on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been maintained, you know, so that it's playable, and then it's been modded. So people have done like HD mod and mega mod and just done like retexturings and changed the gameplay and added all kinds of stuff to it.
So it's maybe better updated than some of
it is better updated, but it's still locked to 24 frames per second and 320 by 240. And even like, I don't know if a modern player would accept gameplay at 24 frames per second. Art, sure, you know, if it's pixel art, flipbook, that's okay. But like fixed rotation angles for ships, that would be really, that's really hard at 60 frames per second. We tried it. Trust me, we tried it. I realize we're over an hour. I don't want to eat up your guys' time, but I really appreciate your time. I do, just because you brought it up here, I did want to talk about the beginning of the game, because it's like you just scratched a creative itch for me. And I don't want to spoil too much of what we're doing, but what I will say is
Daenerys back. Daenerys back, man. Psychically dominating galaxy.
My lips are sealed about what's actually happening, but I can talk about what's not happening, which is, or the area that I will just say I agree with you, which is, I distinctly remember I played Ur-Quan Masters for the first time. We just started, you know, putting the pieces of Pistol Shrimp together. And I remember sitting at Fred's house, sitting with Fred and Paul, and I said, one of my favorite parts of this game is how immediately and clearly the stakes are presented to me and how I care. And Earth is under a red shield. It's told through images, limited images, granted, but images. I'm told it through some text, right? There's a whole intro cinematic. I am the last hope for the universe. I am all alone. Go make friends, right? Because I don't have any friends. And that stake setting was, I mean, like, it's not my work, so I at least I can feel better about saying, oh, I loved it. You know, if it was my work, oh, I'm so good, I was so smart. No, that stake setting was incredible and sticks with me.
How do you do it again?
Now. Yeah,
is the question.
Well, our answer, I'll just say for now, and this could change, but the answer that we've gone with is we can't do it. We'll never hit that mark. And especially when you're dealing with nostalgia, which is how people remember how it was, it's like a double whammy. You know, it's going to be too hard to do that. So we're currently, I mean, that doesn't mean we have no stake setting, but the idea is if we go this way, they basically hit the ceiling, right? Ur-Quan Masters, in my opinion, kind of hit the ceiling and like did such a good job of it. Competing with ourselves, don't want to talk about challenges of sequels, competing with ourselves and trying to hit the same mark is, in my opinion, it's too hard. And it would be great if we could pull it off, but being different and having something that isn't jumping this way, but jumping this way and trying to go as far as we can this way and differentiating ourselves so that, okay, it's still the same game, but the challenge is if we tried to hit the mark and we missed it, which we would, I'll just be honest, we wouldn't hit as high, because I don't think we will. And it's me being a cautious creative. We try to hit the mark. People who played the old game are going to pick it up and say, this isn't as good as the old one. Whereas if we lean into being a little different, then people will go, oh, I have a different tone to start with. I have a different framework to start with, but it's still a sequel, you know, and it's still that. There's somewhere in the middle between total right turn, which this isn't the same game, and 90 or directly parallel, which is you tried to hit it and you failed me, and
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I can't make someone 6 years old again playing a game that they love. I
It's
wish I
it's
could. That would be great.
Star Wars prequel versus Star Wars sequels.
Oh, I
Right?
remember.
Yes.
I remember the
It's
age
like
I was
this
when I
is
saw it.
this is like this plot makes no sense. I can't even follow it. Versus this plot is exactly like the original. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not saying we have the exact answer yet. It's development, right? But I'll just say,
Yeah.
just because you brought that up, and I thought it was interesting that stood out to you. It's like, yeah, it stood out to us too. And we go, oh, I think we need something you care about. We need things you care about. But You're the Last Hope for Humanity is going to be a real tough sell.
Yeah. Again. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, the same thing again. And
Yeah.
also, this isn't spoilery. Well, is this spoilery? By the time people hear this, I think it'll be okay. You're exploring new areas of space.
Okay.
And
okay.
so, if we want you to care about what's in the new area of space, I mean, Earth ain't coming along for the ride. So if we want you to care about what's over there, we need a different reason why you care, because, hey, you fixed Earth back home. What are we going to do? Just play, well, whoopsie, slave shield reactivated. Oops.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do that. That's too cheesy.
The quasi space points have changed. That's what's new. It's still the same constellations.
I mean, kudos to Tears of the Kingdom for reusing their same map, but they changed it. They obviously did some stuff, but they changed their game enough that it's like, okay, you start playing, it's different. Anyway, I know I've eaten up a bunch of your time, but I really, really appreciate it. It was so nice talking with you. And if I can just fanboy just for a little bit, please forgive me. But I played Star Renegades all last week. I didn't play a single other game, which is unusual for me. I usually have cycles and I'll go in and out and whatever. I have limited gaming time. And this weekend, especially, I was super busy. But Halcyon 6 ready for this week. But I loved Star Renegades. I had so much fun with it. I thought the turn-based, time-based aspect, which I have experienced before, I did not think, oh, I've played this before. I thought, this is fresh. I felt like I'm old. My reflexes suck now, and so I'll play some Twitch-based stuff if it's cooperative or whatever. But turn-based, that speaks to my heart. But I loved it. I thought the time-based aspect was so cool, and I really enjoyed combat as puzzle. And it hit that middle ground of JRPG. I'm getting stronger, but also I still have to be smart and I still have to be intelligent. I still have to think about what I'm doing. And it was really cool. And then for a brief second opinion, my girlfriend sat and watched me play it a little bit too. And, she's like, oh, I don't really like science fiction, but she was watching the UI and the time bar moving and the way it played. And she's like, oh, but it looks like a JRPG. I think I'd like that. So cool. Hey, kudos. But anyway, I just wanted to say I really I loved it. I enjoyed it. I was having a ton of fun with it, and I'd keep playing it if I wasn't going to pick up Halcyon 6.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, I mean, this is not just for PR, so thank you. One thing about being indie, I don't know, that's new to me is I don't get to talk to a lot of other game developers too. And I'm learning about this because I used to work in a whole building full of other developers or whatever. And you would have a network, and we're under Activision. So there are other studios, and there were just natural ways I could wind up talking to other people. And I feel so lonely. I don't get to talk to people that much. So just being able to share, I loved your game. This is so cool. I'll take the opportunity when I can, because it feels harder to come by for some reason. Maybe it's also the remote work thing.
Cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Totally.
Honestly, it's such an honor.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor to work. I mean, I'm sorry, Fred couldn't be here today. I wanted him to be here, but Fred couldn't be here. But I'll share this with him, and he'll get to hear it too. So your words will meet him, and could talk again sometime, I'm sure. But it means a lot to me to be able to work on a game that impacted a lot of people and hear that it had an impact. And I loved working on Skylanders because kids got to play the game, and that means a lot to me to see parents playing games with their kids. That's one of my favorite things, and I don't know if we'll be able to pull it off with the Ur-Quan Masters too. I hope so. I hope that somebody who played the Ur-Quan Masters when they were young, grew up, plays this game, and wants to show it to their children. But I get that games have an impact, but it's rare to hear from so many people, yes, this was the game and it mattered to you. So I really appreciate that. And it's an honor to listen to you. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share all this.
Anytime.
Thank you. And
all right.
If we ever decide to make a sequel to Halcyon 6, which we actually have some ideas for, Maybe we could trade some races, and we'll have some guest appearances.
Oh my
across
gosh.
the races.
Please, can we talk? Yeah, and also like, hey, you know, Peter, you want to write some alien races for us? You
Hey,
interested?
I'm very busy right now, but honestly, like that would totally be a dream come true. If I could, yeah, I mean, Garry might be like, Peter, what the
Don't
hell are
say
you talking about?
Hey.
But like,
I'll stop
if
the recording and then you can
yeah,
say whatever you
if
want.
like time, if things worked out in terms of scheduling, then like I would totally be up for that. It's been a while since I've done some writing, but that would be a total honor.
Cool. Well, I think I like all of this. I like all those ideas. You know, I don't know how much you know about the development of Ur-Quan Masters, but it was a very scrappy experience, you know, as far as bringing in lots of different collaborators. And for me, I think it shows in the game. It has a lot of variety and, you know, no different aliens are very
Well,
different.
the
And they
music
come,
was all like was mostly collaborators, right? Or half of
yeah,
it
it
or
was
something?
all basically crowdsourced before people talked about it. They ran a music contest and they said, we'll give you $500 if you make whoever
So
gives us the
crazy.
best music.
Because
And
honestly,
then
it's like still one of the best soundtracks.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love those
Going
musics.
back, like man.
Yeah, it still holds up. We're the music person is not here, but one challenge for making new music is again similar. Like, oh, you hit this mark. We can't go the same direction. We have to go a little different because we can't recreate that. But yeah, seriously, be in touch about what we could do together,
Hey,
and I'd love to do something.
send me an email. I take a while to respond to email sometimes, but definitely I'll keep
The
an
good
eye
news
out.
is we're not ready for bringing in more stuff. I mostly just wanted to bring it up and say like, hey, like we're collaborating with other people making this, more the merrier. You know, we're still figuring some stuff out, and we have a lot of writing to do at the very least.
Can imagine. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll be in touch, and definitely when I get to play some Halcyon 6, I'll pop you a note and say like, okay, I got to play it now. So sorry I didn't go prepared. I'll be sure to share that with you. All right.
Cool.
Thanks so much for
Thanks.
talking. I'll share this with you when you go live and when we do our like promotional stuff, but really appreciate it.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Great talking.
Good talking.
Bye.
Take care.
See ya.